Story 1. The Axemen of New Orleans. Our first story takes us back to New Orleans in the early 1900s, when a serial killer known as the Axemen terrorized the city between 1918 and 1919. The Axeman was no ordinary killer. His attacks were brutal, random, and seemingly unstoppable. He would break into homes in the dead of night, using an axe to savagely murder his victims. What made it even more terrifying was the fact that he rarely brought his own weapon. Instead, he would use the victim's own axe or tools found within the home. He targeted people of various ethnicities, ages, and backgrounds. His victims were often Italian-American grocers or their families, but no one was truly safe, as the attacks seemed random. The entire city was paralyzed with fear, wondering who would be next. The police were baffled by the Axeman's ability to strike without leaving any substantial evidence. Despite the best efforts of law enforcement, he always managed to slip away after each attack. His victims were found in their homes with no signs of forced entry and doors still locked. The clean escapes raised suspicions that he may have had an accomplice or used some sort of hidden method to access his victims' homes. But no matter how hard the police worked or how many theories emerged, they couldn't catch him. One of the most chilling moments in the Axeman saga occurred in March 1919, when a letter supposedly written by the killer himself was published in a local newspaper. The letter was eerie, filled with boastful and mocking language, and it claimed the Axeman would strike again on a specific night unless the city was alive with jazz music. On that night, he wrote, he had a passion for jazz, and that no one playing jazz would be harmed. Fearful of his threats, people flooded the jazz clubs, and homes played music all night long. Sure enough, no murders occurred that night. The Axeman continued his bloody rampage for months afterward, attacking more people and spreading more fear throughout the city. Then, just as mysteriously as the killings began, they stopped. The last known murder attributed to the Axeman occurred in October 1919 when he killed Mike Pepitone, a father of 6. After that, he disappeared from the scene completely. Was he killed? Did he move to another city? Was he imprisoned for a different crime? The Axeman's identity remains one of the most enduring unsolved mysteries in true crime history. Story 2. The Hinterkaifeck Murders. Our second story takes us to a small farmstead in Bavaria, Germany, where a series of bizarre and gruesome events unfolded in 1922. The Hinterkaifeck farm was a rural, isolated property where the Gruber family lived. The family consisted of Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their daughter Victoria, her 2 young children, and a maid named Maria Baumgartner. For years, strange occurrences had been reported on the farm. Andreas had told neighbors that he found mysterious footprints in the snow leading to his house, but none leading away. He had heard strange noises in the attic and found items moved or misplaced. He even found an unfamiliar newspaper in the house, but despite all these signs of an intruder, the family did not leave or contact the authorities. On the night of March 31st, 1922, a horrific crime was committed. Andreas, his wife, their daughter Victoria, and her 7-year-old daughter Cecilia were lured into the barn one by one and murdered with a mattock, an agricultural tool. Their bodies were left piled on top of one another, hidden under hay. Inside the house, the maid Maria, who had only just started working that day, and Victoria's youngest child, 2-year-old Joseph, were also murdered with the same brutal precision. What followed was a case that shocked and baffled the entire country. After the murders, the killers seemed to remain on the property for several days. They fed the livestock, kept the fire going, and even ate meals from the kitchen. The farm animals were taken care of, and smoke was seen coming from the chimney. This eerie behavior suggested the killer was familiar with the family's routine and felt comfortable in their home. Despite an extensive investigation and several leads, the authorities were unable to identify the killer. Multiple theories arose, including suspicions that a spurned lover of Victoria might have been responsible, or that it could have been a disgruntled farmhand who had once worked for the family. Over the years, several people have been considered suspects, but no one was ever charged. The case remains unsolved to this day, with many wondering who could have committed such a cold and calculated mass murder, and why they would have stayed on the farm afterward, as if nothing had happened. The Hinterkaifeck murders are now one of Germany's most infamous and mysterious crimes, still haunting the public imagination more than a century later. Story 3: The Girl in the Box. Our final story is one of the most disturbing cases of abduction and prolonged captivity in American history. This is the tragic case of Colleen Stan, who in 1977 was just 20 years old when she was kidnapped by Cameron and Janice Hooker. Colleen had been hitchhiking from her home in Eugene, Oregon, to a friend's birthday party in Northern California when she accepted a ride from the seemingly normal couple. Little did she know, this would be the last time she'd experience freedom for the next 7 years. Upon reaching a secluded area, Cameron Hooker turned on Colleen, binding her, gagging her, and placing a homemade wooden box over her head to deprive her of all sensory input and make her more compliant. This was just the beginning of a long nightmare. Cameron and Janice Hooker brought her to their home, where she was kept as a sex slave for years. Under constant threat and psychological manipulation, Colleen was forced to live in a coffin-like box under their bed for up to 23 hours a day. The psychological abuse was just as horrific as the physical. Cameron Hooker convinced Colleen that she was being monitored by a powerful organization known as the Company, which would torture or kill her and her family if she tried to escape or disobey him. He forced her to sign a contract agreeing to be his slave and kept her in total isolation, breaking her spirit over time. Even more disturbingly, Janice Hooker was complicit in the abuse, though she herself was a victim of Cameron's control and manipulation. For 7 long years, Colleen endured this torment. But in 1984, Janice began to have a change of heart. She helped Colleen escape and eventually exposed her husband's horrific crimes to the authorities. After gaining her freedom, Colleen worked with law enforcement to bring Cameron Hooker to justice. He was arrested and sentenced to life in prison for his unspeakable acts. Colleen's story is one of unimaginable suffering, but also of incredible strength and survival. Despite the years of abuse she endured, she has gone on to live her life and share her story of survival. The case of the girl in the box remains a chilling reminder of how vulnerable we can be, and how evil can hide behind the most ordinary of appearances.